Welcome to Blood Moons and the Crown, a prophetic anthology of the end times. Each week, these fictional, biblically based short stories speak to what will happen before the war at Armageddon, where Jesus Christ will return to earth and eradicate Satan and sin from our world. Learn what the Bible has to say about end times prophecy through these emotionally charged accounts of what people could one day face.
God's Child. Part 1. The morning after the world changed. He had always been a man who woke early. Decades of professional habit. Board meetings at 7, conference calls that crossed time zones, flights to catch before the rest of the building had switched on the coffee machine. All of it had trained his body into a rhythm that retirement had not undone. He rose with the light. He had done so for as long as he could remember, and he supposed he would do so until the morning he did not rise at all. On that particular morning, the morning the world was different. Though he did not yet know precisely how different, he rose at 5:30, shuffled in his wool slippers across the parquet floor of his apartment, and stood at the tall windows that looked out over the broad boulevard below. The city lay in its pre-dawn gray, beautiful the way old stone is always beautiful, indifferent the way old cities always are. 7 floors below him, the pavement glistened with last night's rain. A delivery lorry idled at the corner. A woman walked a small dog. Ordinary things. He pressed his palm to the glass and felt the cold come through it. He was 68 years old. He was trim, reasonably healthy for his age, silver-haired, with the kind of angular face that had once been called distinguished and was now simply old. He had been an engineer, structural, the kind that designed bridges and tunnels and the bones of large buildings, and he had been very good at it, and for many years it had been the whole of his life. He had retired 4 years ago with a generous pension, a comfortable apartment in a good arrondissement, and a silence where his purpose used to be. His wife had died 6 years before that. Alzheimer's disease. A slow and merciless dissolution that had taken her from him over the course of 11 years, stealing first her short memory, then her long memory, then her recognition of his face, and finally her breath. He had watched every stage of it. He had held her hand through every stage of it, and somewhere in the middle of those 11 years, perhaps around the 4th year, when she had stopped calling him by his name and begun calling him by her brother's name, or perhaps earlier, or perhaps the precise moment did not matter. He had closed whatever door inside himself had once been cracked open toward the idea of God, and he had locked it, and he had thrown the key somewhere he could no longer find. He was not an angry atheist. He had never been the sort to lecture people at dinner parties, or to feel any particular contempt for those who believed. Belief, he had come to conclude, was a comfort available to some people and not to others, in the same way that some people could sleep anywhere and others could not sleep without their particular pillow. He simply did not believe. He had examined the evidence as carefully as he had once examined load-bearing calculations, because that was his nature, to examine things carefully, and he had found the case unconvincing. A universe indifferent to human suffering. A world in which a woman of profound gentleness and warmth could be slowly and systematically dismantled by her own brain while her husband watched. These were not the products of a loving creator. These were the products of nothing in particular. So he was at peace with his atheism, as he was at peace with most things. He made his coffee. He read. He walked along the river in the afternoons. He ate well when he could be bothered to cook, and ate adequately from the brasserie on the corner when he could not. He had friends, fewer than before, because retirement had a way of reducing the circle, and age had reduced it further. But enough. He had his books. He had his habits. He had been, until quite recently, a contented man. The changes had come gradually, and then all at once. He poured his coffee. black, no sugar, and stood at the kitchen counter reviewing what he knew. 3 months ago, give or take, roughly a third of the world's population had simply vanished. That was how the authorities had put it, eventually, when the authorities had found words at all. Vanished. Not died. There were no bodies. Not fled. There was nowhere they could have fled to. Not all at once. Not that many of them. Not in the night between a Tuesday and a Wednesday. They had simply ceased to be present in the world. Clothing found in beds, in chairs, at desks, at the wheels of vehicles. Cars on motorways drifting driverless until they met the guardrail or each other. A commercial airliner descending unmanned into a field in Normandy because both pilots had been among those who were no longer there. 163 people on that flight who were still there, still strapped into their seats, alive and screaming, had died when the plane went down. That had been, he now understood, the lesser catastrophe. He had known some of the people who were gone. His neighbor across the hall, Madame Bertrand, a stout and cheerful widow of 73 who had gone to Mass every single morning of her life and who always left a small pot of something on his doorstep at Christmas. Gone. His doctor's nurse, a young woman from somewhere in West Africa, whose name he could never quite remember, but whose face had always reassured him. Gone. A colleague from his engineering days, a man named Fontaine, who had been quietly but openly religious in a way that had always struck him as slightly peculiar. Gone. He had not vanished, nor had most of the people he knew. This fact had not escaped his notice. In the weeks following what the media, scrambling, breathless, eventually frightened, had begun calling l'enlèvement, he had conducted a private and informal survey among his acquaintances. The pattern was not absolute, but it was unmistakable. Those who had been conventionally, casually religious, who attended church at Christmas and Easter and privately believed in something vague and benevolent, most of them were still here. Those who had been vocally, actively devout, who spoke of their faith as a living thing, who carried it into their daily lives, who prayed not as performance, but as conversation. Those were the ones who tended to be gone. He did not know what to make of this. He had filed it, as he filed most things that did not yet compute, in a mental folder labeled insufficient data. That had been 3 months ago. A great deal had changed in 3 months. The world had not ended with the vanishing. He had half expected it to, had half expected the social order to collapse entirely in those first terrible days and weeks, and in some places it had. In certain cities there had been riots. In certain regions the loss of so many people so quickly had caused systems to fail, power grids, water treatment facilities, supply chains. People had panicked, reasonably enough. People had hoarded. There had been violence. But the world had not ended. The world had reorganized itself. This, in a way, he found more unsettling than the chaos. With remarkable speed, unseemly speed, he sometimes thought, the kind of speed that suggested preparation, a new international framework had emerged. It was called, in the English that had become the world's language of governance even here in France, the Global Covenant of Unified Nations, and it operated through a council of 12 regional representatives who answered to an executive body that was never quite clearly named in any news report he had read. There was also, far more prominent in the daily media than any politician, a figure known simply as the High Shepherd. The High Shepherd was a man he had first seen on television approximately 6 weeks after the vanishing. He was tall, silver-tongued, magnetic in the way that certain people are magnetic, the way a flame is magnetic, drawing the eye without warmth. He spoke with the cadence of a preacher and the vocabulary of a statesman. He had announced, in a broadcast that had been simulcast in 47 languages, the formation of what he called the World Church of Reconciliation. an ecumenical body that claimed to unite all surviving religious traditions under a single roof, providing what he called spiritual coherence in a time of cosmic uncertainty. He had watched this broadcast in his armchair, nursing a glass of wine, feeling the hair on the back of his neck rise in a way he could not quite account for. The High Shepherd had also announced, in that same broadcast, the coming implementation of what he called the Global Identity and Commerce Protocol, a biometric registration system tied to a small device implanted just below the skin of the right hand or the forehead, depending on which location the registrant preferred. The device would contain all of the registrant's identity documents, medical records, financial accounts, and, the High Shepherd had said this with particular warmth, it would allow full participation in the new economic order that was being built to replace the shattered markets of the pré-l'enlèvement world. The word the High Shepherd did not use was mandatory. He spoke of it as an opportunity, as a gift. But the implication had been clear to anyone paying attention. The program had begun rolling out 2 weeks ago, and the signs had begun appearing in shop windows, on ATM screens, at petrol stations and pharmacies and grocery counters. Coming soon, registration required for all transactions. Part 2. The Search. He began at the bookshops. He was not a man who did things by halves. When he had been building bridges, he had researched every element of a problem before he began to solve it. He had read everything there was to read, consulted every available authority, exhausted every avenue of knowledge before he trusted his calculations. He brought this same disposition to his search for a Bible. There had been Bibles everywhere once. That much he knew. He could remember in the days of his childhood. He had grown up in Lyon, the son of 2 thoroughly secular parents who had nonetheless sent him, briefly, to a Catholic school. There had been Bibles in hotels, Bibles in hospital waiting rooms, Bibles given out by people on the street. He had not owned one and had not wanted one, but he had been aware of their ubiquity in the way you are aware of things you do not need. He went first to the large bookshop near the Opera House, which had been his preferred bookshop for the better part of a decade. He spent 20 minutes browsing the shelves where religion and philosophy were housed. He found sections on Buddhism, on Islam, on what was called contemporary spirituality, and a growing section of books with the High Shepherd's face on the cover. He found books about the Bible, analyses, critiques, histories. He did not find a Bible. He found a young employee and asked. The young man's expression was difficult to read. Not hostile, exactly. More the expression of someone who had been asked this question before and had been given an answer to provide. "We haven't carried those for a few weeks," the young man said. "Supply issue." "A supply issue with Bibles?" "With that particular category of material, yes. The Publisher Registration Act, you may have seen it in the news, requires all publishers and distributors of religious texts to obtain a license through the World Church of Reconciliation. It's a process that takes some time. In the interim, we can't legally stock unlicensed material. He stared at the young man. The Bible requires a license? Religious texts of all kinds are covered by the Act. Yes. The young man maintained his professionally neutral expression. There are World Church-approved editions in production. They should be available within the next few months. They'll be integrated with the new digital platform, which I'm told is very... He thanked the young man and left. He tried 4 more bookshops that day. The story was identical in each. Supply issues, the Act, approved editions forthcoming. One shop owner, an older man, slightly embarrassed, told him quietly that he had received a visit from someone connected to the World Church 3 weeks ago and had been strongly encouraged to remove what the visitor had called legacy editions of religious texts from his shelves. He had done so. He had a family. He went home that evening and searched online. This took most of the night. The results were strange in ways he had not encountered before in 40 years of internet use. Searches for Bible online returned thousands of results, but the results were almost uniformly for the official World Church digital platform, a service that was not yet operational, pending, he read in the fine print, completion of the registration program. The implication was clear. Once you had registered, you could access the World Church Digital Library, which would include approved editions of major religious texts. He searched more specifically. Bible text online free. Gospel of John. Book of Revelation. The pages he found were there and not there. Cached versions of sites that had existed until recently, now returning errors. Links that pointed nowhere. He found several pages that appeared to be what he was looking for. Chapters of the Bible laid out in plain text. But when he clicked, he received a message. This content has been temporarily suspended pending review by the Content Harmonization Office. He had not known there was a Content Harmonization Office. He did not know what harmonization was being undertaken. He searched until 2 a.m, becoming more frustrated and more intent with every dead end, and he did not find what he was looking for. He slept badly and rose early and resumed. He knew there had to be churches. The World Church of Reconciliation had absorbed most major Christian denominations within its structure. The news coverage had been thorough on this. But surely there were holdouts. Individual churches, small communities, people who had refused the merger. He spent the morning trying to find them. The city's official religious directory, once maintained by the city and now, he noticed, managed under a World Church subdomain, listed only World Church-affiliated locations. He searched for independent churches and found nothing useful. The term appeared to have been reclassified in the search algorithms as something adjacent to extremist religious group, because the results were dominated by government advisories about the risks of unregistered religious organizations. He printed a map of the city's churches from an old travel guide he found on his shelf, the physical book, from 7 years ago, slightly dusty. And he spent the next 3 days walking. Most of the churches were World Church now. He could tell by the new additions to their signage, a particular symbol that the World Church used, a kind of stylized flame over a globe, and by the posters in their doorways advertising services that bore the High Shepherd's logo. He entered several. The interiors had been altered in ways he found difficult to specify precisely, but the sensation was one of subtraction. Something had been removed, some quality of the atmosphere, and something else substituted that did not feel the same. A World Church representative at one of them, a young woman with a very professional smile, welcomed him warmly and explained that the church was now fully integrated and that she would be happy to walk him through the registration process if he was interested. He thanked her and left. He found 3 churches that had no World Church signage. 2 were locked and dark, their doors padlocked. Recently, by the look of the chains. A sign on one read, "This property temporarily under administrative review." The third showed signs of recent occupancy, a light on somewhere inside, a smell of candle wax. But when he knocked, there was no answer. He knocked harder. He heard movement inside. He called through the door, "I'm looking for a Bible. I only want to speak to someone about the Bible. Please." The light went out. No one answered. He stood on the step for a long time, and then he walked home. He began asking people. This was harder. He was, by nature and by profession, a private man. Not unfriendly, but not the sort to accost strangers with personal questions. But the urgency he felt had grown steadily over these weeks, fed by each dead end, and he had begun to understand that it was no longer merely intellectual curiosity. He could feel the deadline approaching, the signs in the shop windows, registration required for all transactions, were no longer coming soon. They were beginning to say effective date. The date was 6 weeks away. He began with his friends. His friend Margot, A sharp-tongued and affectionate woman of 70, who had been a literature professor before retirement, was sympathetic but unhelpful. She had no Bible, had never had one. She was bemused by his urgency. Why do you need a Bible specifically? Surely anything you want to know about what it says is available from 1,000 scholarly sources. The scholarly sources all seem to be experiencing supply issues, he said dryly. She laughed, and then did not laugh. You're not one of those who think the vanishing was the rapture? I don't know what I think, he said honestly. That's why I want to read it. She thought for a moment. My sister was religious. She was one of the ones who... She's gone. A pause. I have some of her things in a box. I could look. He felt a leap of hope. He asked her to look. 3 days later she called him. She had gone through the box. Her sister had apparently taken her Bible with her everywhere. It was not among her things. She apologized. He thanked her and stood in his kitchen holding the phone and breathing through his nose for a moment. He called his former colleague Bastian, who had been something of a student of religions in a general scholarly way. Bastian had 8 books about the Bible on his shelves, he said, and would be happy to lend them. But an actual Bible? He checked. He did not have one. He had never owned one. He called the woman at the pharmacy he had used for years, a warm and talkative woman whose name he knew, who knew about his medications, who had been kind to him in the years when his wife was declining. She was not there. Her replacement, younger, unfamiliar, told him that the pharmacy was transitioning to the new registration system and that there would be an adjustment period. He wrote a letter to 3 universities, the kind of letter a retired engineer could write, measured and specific, asking whether their libraries retained copies of the Bible and whether any scholar of biblical studies might be willing to speak with him. He received 1 automated reply acknowledging receipt. He received nothing else. He was not, he told himself in these weeks, going mad. He was not having a religious crisis in the ordinary sense. He was conducting an investigation. He had encountered a structural problem, a question with a specific answer, and he was applying his professional instincts to locating the answer. The fact that the question was, does the Bible warn against a mark in the right hand that prevents buying and selling, did not make it less valid. The fact that finding the answer was proving extraordinarily difficult did not make the question less urgent. What it did was raise, in his mind, a further question, and this further question was one he preferred not to look at directly, but which he could not help looking at the way you cannot help looking at a particular cloud formation, the one that looks, unavoidably, like a face. The question was, what does it mean that the answer is being made so difficult to find? He began to dream about his wife. Not the wife of the disease, not the diminished, bewildered woman of the last years, the woman who had looked at him with kind and empty eyes, not knowing him. He dreamed of the wife of 30 years ago, the wife of the early morning light, and the book on the pillow beside him, the wife who had padded the space next to her on the bed. In the dreams she was reading, always reading, and he would try to see what she was reading, and as he leaned in to look, the words would be just out of focus, just beyond resolution, and he would wake with a frustration he could not name. He realized one morning, standing at the window, coffee in hand, watching the street below where the signs in the pharmacy window now read, "Registration required," effective in 21 days. He was frightened. Not of the registration process, not of the physical act of it. He was frightened of the wrongness he felt about it, because the wrongness was connected to a question he did not yet have the intellectual equipment to answer, and because the question was connected to his wife, and because his wife was connected to a God he had spent 30 years systematically not believing in, and because all of this was converging on him at a time in his life when he was alone in a 7-story apartment with his wool slippers and his coffee, and his excellent view of a city that was becoming, by increments, somewhere else. He was frightened, and he was 68 years old, and he was alone.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope this episode has inspired and encouraged you as you draw closer to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If you have thoughts, questions, or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You reach us via email at rev11.15media@gmail.com. We hope you're enjoying the story and learning what the Bible reveals about end times prophecy and the final battle at Armageddon. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. May God keep and protect you always.